This is really interesting. Beyerdynamic have brought out their own virtual headphone calibration software called Headphone Lab, and it will give you, as you might expect, a flat response for your headphones, but it'll also emulate a control room. So it'll emulate speakers within a room, so you get a completely different response than you do to the headphones on their own. But what makes it really special is that if you've got some of their Pro models, it has literally got the calibration data for your specific headphones. So you put in your serial number and it knows exactly what your headphones are doing. Just type in the serial number into the software. You can find it on the inside of your headphones. Here's the software. It's a really simple to use interface. Add your headphones and enter the serial number if prompted. And on the left, we can turn the calibration on and off. And on the right, we've got the room modeling section. And in the middle, there's a little safe mode button to prevent distortion. And on the top right, we've got a bypass for the whole effect. And that's it. It's really simple to use. You just stick it on your main output bus. So on your left and right, your main left and right. And it's even clever enough to know it's there. So when you're bouncing down, you don't even have to use the bypass button to turn it off. And I've been using it with these four. They're all studio headphones, mainly for mixing, although the 990 is more for critical listening, so it's a bit brighter than the others. First off, we've got an old pair of well-used DT880 Pros. I've had these for a few years. They're €159 on the Beyerdynamic site. These are semi-open and they're the cheapest of the bunch I've got here. Then I've got the 990 Pro X, and these are €199. The website says these are best for editing and critical listening, and these are a little brighter than the DT900s, which are €239. And these are best for mixing and mastering, so they've got a little less top end than the 990s. And these are both open back designs. And finally, I've got the DT990 Pro Mark IIs, which are the most expensive here at €539. These have got different drivers from the others. They're called the Tesla range. Nothing to do with the cars. But yeah, these are like over double the price of the others. I won't be going into the differences of those different headphone models here, but I will look at the difference the software makes and if it levels the playing field. Here it is again in Logic. I've got it on the main stereo mix bus. And I've also got this little EQ here to see what's going on, but you can't really tell what's going on at all with that. But you can see in the middle here, we've got the different calibration curves for the headphones. So the 990 Pro X doesn't come with its own. Neither does the 880 Pro. So that's obviously a range of values. Whereas if we go to the 1990, we've got the curves here for the calibration of both the left and the right speaker. And again, for the 900 Pro X, we've got the calibration curves. And if we go to add another headphone, for example, we've got a whole list of headphones here. Most of them, you don't need the serial number. But once we get down to here, the 700 Pro X, the 900 Pro X, the 1770s and the 1990s asks for a serial number. We've also got some earbuds down here as well. So it is really simple to set up. I've been playing it with lots of different types of music, but you're going to have to suffer one of my tracks for this so I don't get a copyright claim. And we'll leave the calibration off for a second. And I can bring it in or out. In fact, I'll bring it forward to where we've got some vocals. So you can see it's going to flatten this top end. You'll hear it more when there's some top end in there.
I sit and watch the world drift by in rain or shine. Watch people laugh and people cry in rain or shine. I know the sun.
It's not going to sound the same for you as it does for me, obviously, but it's giving you a good idea, hopefully, of what it's doing.
Sure as you'll be on my mind, rain or shine.
Something with the bass there, hasn't it? Yeah. But you can hear that it's doing different things with each of the headphone models. I thought that was interesting with the 880 because the bass is really low there. You can really hear it boosting.
Watch people laugh and
We've also got this little button down here. And as the text says, this compensates for your specific headphones. So let's flick this on. The difference there. Yeah, so hopefully you can hear what that's doing. As I say, it's not going to sound identical in whatever you're monitoring it on. So next up is the loudspeaker emulation, and this is a completely different thing to me to the factory calibration, and I'll show why. Let's just take the calibration off and play something. You should really put some headphones on for this because through monitors, it's a bit confusing because you're hearing your own room and then this room as well. So put headphones on if you can. This is without the factory calibration. So we've got a dry room. This has got less reverb in it. More reverb in the room. Make the room a bit more lively. Things happening, but for me, I really like this dry wet around here. I'm going to take it out. It sounds quite unnatural in headphones. To me, it sounds really unnatural through headphones when this is bypassed now. But I do prefer it, I think, without the headphone calibration in, but with the room calibration or the loudspeaker emulation. This is how I've been enjoying listening to it. Got a bit of distortion there, safe mode. We'll stop that happening. We'll also reduce the volume, so you might have to turn it up a little bit in your headphones. And if you've got headphones on, you'll realise how strange that now sounds. And if you didn't listen to that with headphones, I'd suggest to go back and try it again, because if you are listening to it in a room, when you've got the loudspeaker emulation on, you've got two loudspeakers you're listening to it through, which is a bit odd, so you don't get the same experience. Anyway, I didn't want to go into too much detail about the headphones themselves, but really I can't discuss too much about it without discussing the headphones as well. So yes, my 880 Pros, had them for years. I bought them because they're really flat, accurate, and they weren't overly expensive. So it doesn't matter if I drop them or kick them. Yeah, they're like I'd say £200 thereabouts, I think they were when I got them. But they've done the job perfectly for years. I like them because they were nice and flat. But now listening to these two, which has got the newer drivers in them, these sound a bit more open. Whether they're as flat and accurate as that, I couldn't tell you, but they do sound a bit nicer to listen to stuff on. The 990 Pro X is meant to be a bit brighter, and it is. And I prefer listening to stuff on the 900s. But once you got the software in there, are they the same? I'll explain in a little second. And then the DT990 Pro are staggeringly good. So maybe you don't need headphones of this quality, but you know when you've been somewhere and you've a studio perhaps and they've got like £3,000 worth of monitors and you're listening to them and everything sounds nice, and then they push in the big monitors that are inbuilt in the wall with the huge drivers and everything just sounds so much more open and clear. And if you've never done that, I'd suggest doing it because it's quite an experience. That's what these do. Not to such an expense or on such an extent as a £30,000 set of monitors, but the difference between that and that in the openness, the clarity is quite something. I can really see why these are £500 more. But I know what you're wanting to know is, does the software make these sound like these? And the answer is not quite. You can still hear a difference between the two of these. You can still hear that the 990 Pro X, I think, sounds a little bit brighter still. It's hard to tell, obviously, because you plug in one in, you're changing the calibration settings, then you plug in the next set in. But I think these two together are very, very close once you've got the software in there. The 880s sort of lag behind a little bit in the niceness of the sound, but I have found that once I put the factory calibration in, it crunches it a little bit too much on that top end for me. I quite like it sounding a bit more open. It might be flatter, but I like it being a little bit more open. It sounds nicer to listen to. With these, again, it does squish that top end a bit. And if we look at the calibration on that, let's take the calibration off. You can see we've got quite a high-end peak there. So that is getting demolished on all of them, actually. If we go through all of them, if we look at the high end there, there's this little peak around there. So the 900 Pro X has got less of a peak, which is what we expected. It's what the website says. 990 is a bit brighter than the 900. And as we heard there, the 880 has got less low end than the others, which is why when we brought in the calibration for that, you heard a lot more low coming in. Actually, it's the same for the 990 Pros as well, isn't it? Obviously, depends on which bit of the track we were listening to as well. Only a short demo there, but been listening to this for hours trying to understand what the differences are. But I do think I prefer listening to it without the factory calibration in there, because I think even these sound much nicer. So even these sound much nicer, I think, without the factory calibration, because I do quite like that top end. But when you do crush that top end and you flatten everything, if you can still hear everything in that top end working properly, then you've got yourself a good mix. So even though, I mean, headphones flatter things, speakers flatter things, reference speakers, reference monitors, reference headphones aren't meant to flatter things, which is why I really like these. But once you're listening to things for a while, it is nice for them to sound nice. So nice to hear what it does and to be able to reference it in the software. But I wouldn't want to sit there all day listening to it in that reference mode. I just think it sounds nicer without. And then when we come over to the loudspeaker emulation, I like it a bit like this, actually. Safe mode on or off, it doesn't make any difference, depends on the mix. The speaker calibration on, and a little bit more of a treated room than an untreated room. But again, if you turn that dial and you make it into a wet room, so a less treated room, you can hear some smudginess going on. You could hear, in particular, I was noticing on sort of high mid percussion tones, you could hear them doing things, you could hear them bouncing around the room. Again, if it sounds good in that situation and in the dry situation, on and off, then you've got yourself a good mix. So it's a lovely bit of software for playing around with. And it's really encouraging to know that they've got the actual specs of your actual headphones. Has for these two, doesn't for these two. But all in all, yeah, really nice. Does it pull this to being this? Not quite. These still sound nicer. You'd expect them to, twice as much. But it works with these. It does what you want it to with these and with these and with these. They're the 900s. They're the slightly more expensive ones. These were 239. These are 199. They're the 990s. A bit brighter. Still a bit brighter in the software, but not quite as stark a difference as you get without the software. Do the cheaper ones sound like this? Well, they're not going to be able to. They haven't got the same drivers. They haven't got the same responses. They don't sound as precise. And for example, the low end at low levels, you know, these are a much more premium product. But the software itself really does help out with both of these models really well, all the models, because it's doing the same sort of thing with them all. So I feel like I'm waffling now. Yes, the software works. No, it doesn't turn a £200 pair of headphones into a 400 or 500 pound pair of headphones, but it brings them closer and it brings what you can do with them closer together. So I hope that made sense. I hope I wasn't waffling too much at the end there, but I've spent ages swapping headphones here, trying to understand how I'd use it and which I prefer. And oddly, I prefer the £539 or 539 euro headphones over the 239 euros. But if I was going to get one of these, actually, I prefer the slightly less bright 900s, and I think that's what they're known for. Anyway, as I say, hope it was of some use to somebody somewhere. Hope I haven't waffled on too long. If it was of use, please do subscribe, ring the bell, join me over on Patreon. I've got patches, samples, tutorials, and lots of other bits and bobs on there. Also, take a look at my starskycar.com website. Again, patches, samples, stuff you can buy, free stuff. And as I always say, even if you pick up just some of the really cheap little sample packs, it does all help to support the channel. So thanks for staying to the very end, and I will see you next time.